Okay, well, I have 1:30 Eastern, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's NAIFA Young Advisor Team webinar, Understanding the Power of Us, How Your Voice Can Influence Change. Just a quick note before we get started, if you do have any questions during today's presentation, please use the Q&A feature and Zoom, and we will do our best to get to every question at the end of the program. Now here to introduce our featured speakers for the day, we have Coney Schoonover from NAIFA's Government Relations Team.
Thank you, Zach. I'm Cody Schoonover, NAIFA's Legislative Liaison. I've been with NAIFA for about 10 months now, so if some of you have absolutely no idea who I am, that's why. The next few weeks are going to be pretty packed with GR events, so I'm sure you'll be pretty familiar with me by the time this is all over with. Anyways, the plan for today is to just give everyone a glimpse into the world of advocacy, why it's important for your industry, why it's easy to get involved, and why it's a worthwhile use of your time. So I promise to be brief, and I know that you guys probably don't want to hear from, some guy from DC telling you what's up, and that you want to hear from our advocates themselves. But before I go on to get to Corey Anderson, Brett Hill, and Rodney Mogan, I just have a couple of housekeeping items from my end and from my colleague, Julie Harrison. So if we can go on to the next slide. All right, so 2020 has been kind of a roller coaster. We have the whole COVID situation, and then we've got the election. And, everyone saw how contentious 2016 was, and we knew going into 2020 that it was going to be kind of a spectacle, to put it delicately. But no one really expected the year to evolve into, like the current levels of insanity that we're going through. But that being said, advocacy does require that we know, a little more about our elected officials, and there's a lot of potential that things are going to change pretty radically in the next couple of days here. And going into this election, we knew that it was going to be pretty tough for Republicans off the bat. They have more members retiring this year. Trump has become an issue in this election. Like everyone is pretty much tied to him on the Republican ticket. So yeah, they're facing a couple of challenges on their end. And, we know advocacy is a little difficult when you don't know what you're dealing with. And, elections have famously been said have consequences. So to understand the challenges that we're going to be facing in 2021, we need to look a little closer at what the election landscape is shaping up to be. And before I go on to the next slide, I feel like this is a good point to mention that we are 12 days away from November 3rd. So please, 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 please take the time to vote if you haven't already. Now, let's go into what 2021 is going to look like. On paper, it's going to look a little bad for Republicans, but that's on paper. And if we've learned anything from 2016, it's that it's entirely possible for the data, that we're seeing from national polls just not really be indicative of our final election results. So Biden's up pretty much double digits in all of our national polls, but Trump is Trump, and you can never count him out. His supporters aren't by any means unmotivated, and in the swing states, whose electoral votes matter most in this cycle, the polls are really close. Like a lot of them are pretty well within the margin of error. And the Trump campaign, for its part, has been suggesting for some time that the polls we're seeing aren't really indicative of the current state of play in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So the presidential race itself is going to have some pretty serious down ballot effects. A lot of us believe, just based on the historical nature of elections, that whoever's going to sweep the top of the ticket is going to take the down ballot with them. And then this gets into, Republican members of the House of Representatives have also been suggesting that the House is liable to flip in the Republicans' favor, but there's just really no realistic scenario that I'm seeing where that happens. So I think it's pretty easy to expect, and we can go on to the next slide here, that the House of Representatives is going to stay in the Democratic control. All right, so those of us who are looking at 2020 outcomes aren't generally confident enough to make predictions about the presidency and the Senate. And just there's no point. All the crystal balls are pretty foggy on that front. However, and I never thought that I would be saying this, ever in my life, the House of Representatives is offering up a lot of stability in terms of, what we can predict for the election. So in order to take back the House, Republicans would have to pick up 18 seats. That's probably not going to happen. 18-seat pickup is really highly unlikely. And then, we've got Cook Political Report listing 28 districts as toss-ups, Democrats holding 16, Republicans holding 12. The Republicans have been at a pretty continual disadvantage throughout this entire election cycle. It's probably not going to happen for them to sweep the House. We can go on for the next slide. All right, and then when we're looking at the Senate, every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is up for election. In 2018's, Republicans had a pretty favorable cycle. This year, not so good for them starting out. As I've said before, there are a lot of unknowns that's going on, as far as the presidency and the Senate. And it's just really not possible to predict what's going to happen right now. If Republicans maintain their majority, it'll be by the skin of their teeth, but it's equally possible that the chamber is divided 50-50, and then we'll see, whoever the vice president is going to be the tie-breaking vote, or it's possible that members start changing parties and that flips the majority. We can go on to the next slide if we'd like. All right, so there's a big chance that Biden wins. And if he does, predicting policy outcomes and preparing for the future is something that we really need to be on top of. But, we generally know what Biden is going to plan to do. We also know that if Democrats control the House, it's easy for Biden to get some policy passed, easier at least. But if he does sweep the Senate, they'll be able to pass a lot of policy priorities in their corner. So the next couple of slides are going to list, a little bit of Biden's policy positions. Right now, we're looking at healthcare, and everyone pretty much has heard Biden's healthcare plans if they've been paying attention. We're going to look at expanding health insurance options. We're going to be looking at lowering healthcare costs. As a general rule, when you're looking at any candidate's platform, it's best to remember that unless their name is Elizabeth Warren, they're generally going to be mile-high overviews of their policy preferences, unless you've got a plan for everything like Elizabeth Warren did. So yeah, this is his healthcare slide. We can go on to the next one. We're looking at his COVID response plan. Again, this is the biggest issue that Biden's been polling on. Everyone is looking at Biden's COVID response as being a lot better potentially than Trump's COVID response. So, he's been saying he's going to implement widespread testing and tracing, establish sustainable supply chains. He wants to accelerate developments of treatments and vaccines, and he wants to reopen the country right in his terms. We can go on to the next one. All right, so this slide contains little mix and match points from Biden's financial policies. We're focusing on taxes, Social Security, retirement benefits. Because Biden isn't in power at the moment, it's best to take all of this with a grain of salt. This is a wish list at the end of the day, so whatever he gets passed likely won't be exactly what he wants. But this is definitely something to look out for. And, NAIFA always hopes for the best, but we're going to plan for the worst. So, just take that as it is. And let's go on to the next slide where we talk about the Trump administration's plans. All right, so as far as Trump is concerned, I think it's best to say that we can expect more of the same. As Trump has said, promises kept, promises delivered. And that's pretty much been his platform going into 2020, 2021. So we can pretty much expect the same COVID-19 response, continual cutting of federal regulations, prohibiting job growth, and, pursuing what he says is pro-growth policies, and attempts to roll back the Affordable Care Act and, continuing to appoint conservative judges. And this is the point where I wrap up and I switch things over to my colleague, Julie Harrison, who is NAIFA's State Chapter Director, to talk a little more about what's happening in the states.
Thanks, Cody. So I know that, state advocacy may not seem as exciting as Congress or the White House, but state policy actually has a tremendous impact on your industry, which makes our efforts so important. There's actually a series of federal laws that grants states authority to regulate the insurance industry. So it's states, not Congress, who are the primary regulators. And I'll give you a super quick, boring history, just so you don't think that I'm making this up. These laws are dated from as early as like the 1860s, where the Supreme Court cemented state-based insurance regulation as law of the land. That was solidified in 1871 when the National Association of Insurance Commissioners was created. And then the 1945 congressional passed McCarran-Ferguson Act pretty much sealed the deal, that it is in the public's best interest that regulation of insurance be handled by the states, which is, next slide, please. Which makes it perfect that NAIFA happens to have the largest state advocacy program in the industry. So if you want to get involved, NAIFA is definitely the right place to be. State advocacy is also the place where you can truly make a difference, right? Like, it's fantastic when folks can fly into DC and, attend the Day on the Hills and those type of events, but it's so much easier to visit and develop relationships with your state legislators, your local public officials, and to drive up to the state capitol, right? And meet and attend hearings in that way, as opposed to flying all the way to DC. And, as you guys all probably have picked up by now, federal policy tends to move a lot slower and not a lot gets done, where that is not the case in the state arena. Things actually get passed and moved, enacted. So, making a difference, you can truly make a difference in the state arena. I just have a couple of pictures on the next slide that just showcase our work across the country in different state capitals. You'll be hearing from Corey Anderson in a little bit. He's the one testifying there in Minnesota, and I'm assuming he'll talk a little bit about that and their works on the Medical Records Access Act. But there's pictures of our days on the Hill, a little bit of media coverage, and our advocates truly have a lot of fun when they're doing this, and they're really good. NAIFA does make a tremendous impact. Earlier this year before COVID hit and we were actually traveling for work, I was in Tallahassee. There was a big threatening underwriting bill for the life insurance industry. When there's underwriting restrictive proposals out there, we tend to get a little defensive. And NAIFA, not arm in arm, but like an army, and showed up at the hearing that they discussed this bill, and it was impactful. The chairman stopped in the middle of the hearing to recognize, all these advocates who came to show their what's the opposite of support? Their unsupport for the issue. So that's just one example of what a difference NAIFA can make in the state legislature. And then if you want to go to the next slide. So not only do we have you guys as our advocates that are making us successful in this arena, NAIFA also has a very powerful retained lobbyists in almost every single state. A lot of other national trade associations, they work a little bit differently, where they have regional lobbyists. So they're not necessarily living and working in the states at all times, whereas our NAIFA lobbyists, they know Albany, they know Springfield, they know Sacramento. So they bring real value to the lobbying efforts because they actually have the relationships with the lawmakers in that capital. Next slide. Here's just a couple of examples on the types of pieces of legislation that we see crop up across the country. There's been a lot of push from organizations like the AARP to implement a state-run retirement program. So we've been battling those down on a state-by-state basis. There's a lot of privacy, cybersecurity issues are always, something we pay a lot of attention to. And then, of course, I'm sure you guys are all aware of the different fiduciary rules and regulations. I'm sure you all heard about the struggles that we faced in the regulatory and the federal level on that, but they're coming up on the states too. So on a state-by-state case, at a state-by-state basis, we are battling those as well. And just to show how much the state policy can impact you, if you want to go to the next slide, just one example, at the end of 2019, there was a bill in California that would have required independent contractors, including insurance agents and brokers, to become W-2 employees of every single carrier that they're connected to. So as you can imagine, that would have dramatically changed the scope of work for our industry, not in a good way. Thanks to NAIFA's hard work on the issue, as well as the partnership with a few other local trade associations, they secured an exemption for licensees working as agents and brokers. So that was a huge success. If it hadn't been for NAIFA's proactiveness on that issue, I mean, the industry as we know it probably would not look the same in California. And already we are seeing copycat bills pop up in some other states. So just to emphasize on the importance of getting involved in the state side, you can be tremendously impactful, and we are really welcoming you guys to join this fight. So thank you.
Well, thank you, NAIFA California.
Corey, yes, I'm sorry. I should have introduced Corey because when I pointed out in the picture earlier, so take it away.
Well, thank you, NAIFA California. It's one of the 40 states I do business in, and I would not have liked to become a W-2 employee of 20 different companies. So thank you. I want to talk about 3 different stories. Senator Latz, it was one of my first days on the Hill. I go to meet with State Senator Latz. I'm new, green in the industry, kind of scared to go to this day on the Hill, and I decided to go with NAIFA, and we go up there. And I'm sitting down with them, and we get into a discussion around Minnesota being the highest tax state, or one of the top 5 highest tax states in Minnesota, in the country. And what we realize is we're encouraging clients to leave Minnesota to avoid the high income taxes. And we've had numerous clients that have moved to Texas and Florida and some other states to avoid state income tax. And so I said, what do you think we should do about it? Do you have any ideas on what we can do to work around this? He literally gets up, rolls up right by me, and he goes, all you business owners do is take. We provide people by educating them in our schools. We provide great roads. We provide great infrastructure, and you take. Good. We don't want you to move out of the state. And right there, I knew, you know what? I got to get involved. This individual, one of our representatives, is basically saying that people just take when business owners provide tons of jobs, and we don't want them leaving our state. So let's get involved and see what we can do to change it. Well, at that same meeting, I ended up going to a meeting with a different individual. And the different individual I met with was a state representative at the time, Emmer, and he was flying to the floor. He's basically in a quick, brisk walk to get to the floor for a vote. And he said, just come with me. And so I start tagging along with him. He's like, what do you do? And tell him a little bit about what I do. And I go, what do you do? And he goes, well, I'm a lawyer. And I started laughing. I'm like, you're a lawyer? And I didn't really know much about him. Started chatting a little bit more about lawyers and told him a couple lawyer jokes, as my father's a lawyer. But anyways, as we're walking, we get up to the hill, and he says, oh, come with me. You can come back here. And they say, well, do you have your driver's license? And you're not supposed to be able to go on for a vote without getting pre-done background check a couple weeks in advance, all that stuff. But he says to the guy he's with me, I get out there with him, and I literally watch him quickly broker a deal. He starts talking to another representative and basically brokers a deal right in front of me where there was a winner and there was a loser on this bill that they were working on. And he basically brokered a negotiation on a deal right there in front of me. And I quickly realized I got to get involved. Otherwise, my industry is not going to be here. My job's not going to be here. My clients are going to have major things happen at the stroke of a pen by this representative or other representatives. So I started getting involved with him and started going to different fundraising events that he had and getting to know him, going to different town halls, things along those lines. And over time, I've developed a great relationship with him. We've gone out golfing before. I have a picture of me taking a club to his head, like I'm going to take off his head one day, and had some fun with him. So anyways, fast forward a few years, he becomes Congressman Ember, and we've continued this relationship and getting to know him over time. And as we had talked about, I believe Cody had mentioned how it's a long shot that the House might flip into Republican control. The person in charge of that and all of the elections on the House side for the Republicans is Congressman Emmer. And we have a great relationship. Him and I will call each other on the phone and talk about different issues. So developing that relationships is key. He's helped us on a few different issues over the past, and it's good to know your legislators because they can change things quickly. One last story about getting involved is, I don't know about you, but I do a lot in the disability insurance space and life insurance space, and we have to get these things called medical records. And it's, I swear, the thing that takes the longest in underwriting. And in the great state of Minnesota, it just seems that sometimes it takes 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 days or longer to get medical records. So I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I proposed that we create a medical records bill requiring every provider to release medical records in a timely fashion. So I started drafting a bill with our lobbyists here in Minnesota. And I started going to a lot of different events for different legislators on both sides of the aisle at the state level. And over a 2-year period, we eventually got the wording put together. We got the people to endorse the bill or write on the bill and be the authors of that bill at the state level. And then COVID hits. And after 2 years of working on this, I thought my bill was dead. However, we talked about it. NAIFA talked about it. We got to the right people. And we basically said, with COVID, we need medical records even faster because people need to be able to get the insurance before they lose their conditional coverage. And based on the relationships and the different fundraising events we went to, different town hall meetings we went to, just overall building the relationships with the different people at the state level, we were able to get this brought before and have a hearing right at the beginning of COVID, and then literally tagged this bill onto another bill and got our governor to sign this after it went through the House and the Senate at the state level, got our governor to sign this medical records bill right in the middle of this pandemic, which I think was a big event. And it was us going to support Republicans, going to support Democrats, you name it, getting to know the right people to make sure that this bill flew through and got approved during this pandemic that nobody planned on. So now I can say medical records in Minnesota must be released legally within 30 calendar days as of August 1st, 2020. Hopefully pretty soon we'll have 49 other states follow suit. I'm going to pass it over to Brent Hill, the world famous Brent Hill out of good old Texas. You're on mute, buddy.
Thank you, Corey. I do appreciate that. What an amazing story. I know a lot of what I know, what I've done in advocacy, I've learned from Corey and learned from Rodney Mogan, who will be speaking after me. But thank you to everyone who's on the call. Thank you to everyone at our home office to help put this thing together. I think right now, during the political and health-related environments we're in right now, what better time to be a active participant and advocating in. I couldn't agree more what Corey said and what Julie said. You know, so much of what we do is impacted by advocating and participating in the legislative and governmental process, whether that's at the state level or at the congressional conference in Washington, D.C. There is a great amount of things that can be achieved and get done by doing that. So basically one of my first bullet point, if you will, when you get to your association, you get more out of it. And my NAIFA career, my practice in Texas has exponentially grown because I have chosen to take an active role in advocating, participating in government relations, going to the DC plan, getting to know my legislators, not only at the state level, but even at the local level. And you know, you do that, you're a pillar in a community, you're an influence at your state governmental offices in your capital. A lot of great things happen. So, you know, when you, or at least for me, when I choose to participate in the advocacy and government relations arm of NAIFA, and you're out here going to Capitol Hill, lobbying, having a direct personal relationship with your legislators, and you go back to wherever it is, whether you live in Texas, whether you live in Minnesota, whether you live in Iowa, whether you live in Hawaii, or wherever it is you live, when you go back to Main Street USA and you tell these folks, okay, John Doe client, Jane Doe client, the reason I took a couple of days to call you back is because I actually took time out of my schedule to meet with our legislators in Washington, D.C. and either lobby for so-and-so item or lobby against, XYZ. This is what we're doing to protect you. And when you get that message out there and these people have this aha moment, the clients from where you're at, like you go to DC or you go to Austin or you go to St. Paul or whatever it is, and you're making a relationship with our legislators. We had no idea. And it's like, well, because we love what we do and we care about you. And the more, you would not believe how receptive Main Street USA is to that. Phenomenal thing. Next point I want to make is that the legislators and government officials that I built relationships with, because I've been involved for several years in advocacy now at the state and federal level, that when they see me go into their office or they go see me go in their lounge or they see me walking up the steps of the Capitol, hey, there's Brent Hill. He's the NAIFA. He's serious. He's protecting his industry. He's protecting his clients. We love him. You'll look forward to our appointment with him and his other NAIFA representatives every year. But I would like, moving into my last bullet point, there are so many fringe benefits. And what I mean by that is there are benefits that you can't put down on paper by being very proactively involved in the governmental and advocacy aspects of NAIFA. What it's allowed me to do more than anything, and to be quite frank with you, the first time I met Corey Anderson was at the Congressional Fly-In, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And guy welcomed me in with open arms. He, I thought DI stood for direct impact, but he said, no, that's disability insurance. So, he helped me learn all about it. But not only there are countless dozens and dozens and dozens of insurance or financial advisors across the entire federation that I've been able to develop a very mutually beneficial reciprocal business relationship with. And the majority of these people are people that I consider to be family. And I know I can guarantee 110% without a doubt, none of that would have happened had it not been for advocacy or working in the government operations that NAIFA conducts. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Rodney Mogan, fellow Texan.
Thanks, Brent and Corey and everyone else so far. For me, those that know me know I am a political junkie. I do like watching politics. I like all the different issues and the different things more than just for our industry, but I like just looking at how things work. But what really got me was we all can be busy. We can all be, forget different things. And you know what? I forgot to send in my renewal. And and this is about 5-6 years ago. And when I realized that I had forgotten to send in my renewal, my livelihood depends on my licenses. It was 45 days after, and it's because I had 2 pieces of business not issued because of the fact that I wasn't licensed. So I had to go in there. I had to, reset up. Luckily, I just had to pay the fee. But in Texas at the time, it was a $2,500 fee to pay a reinstatement deal. And luckily, I had my hours, but I started to hear what some of the other issues were out there, and people, have multiple licenses like I did, and so on and so forth. And they had all these different dates, and that's really what caught me up. Is I have multiple lines of licensure in the state of Texas, and I always thought that my things were at a certain time, but I forgot that I got one license in July, and that's the one I forgot. So I actually went to NAIFA, talked to them about it, and they had heard about this issue from multiple other members. We went onto the onto the Capitol. We started talking about it. And the story I have is I'm literally sitting there with the chairman of the insurance committee in the House. He's all for our bill. I'm with our lobbyists, and I've told him my story, and he felt bad about it, and he's like, that shouldn't happen. He's like, so what date should we make all the licenses unified for? And you know what? I was like, I don't know. What do you think? And he said, let's do it on your birthday. I'm like, works for me. So that's actually what happened is we now actually have all licenses that you get, no matter when you get it, the renewal date is based on your birth date. So it makes it real easy, makes it real easy to remember, as long as you can remember your birthday. But at the same time, we also we lowered our CE requirements so that it actually was reciprocity across all the different states out there. So there were a lot of different things that we could do, and that really changed the industry for me and showed how I could actually help people by being government relations. And what NAIFA really does is we really advocate for our clients. And one of the biggest things is we've been pushing a financial literacy bill here in Texas to really help educate people in school about their finances to get to where we really need to get to them. We were one of the first states to help pass the elder financial abuse bill that is now being passed by state after state after state, including the national. Many people don't know it, but NAIFA Texas was one of the associations that actually, filed suit against it, and it was the DOL bill, and the DOL bill was struck down here in the Fifth Circuit Court. And then trying to influence the best interest standard. I saw that Arizona and Iowa have now passed new best interest standards. It's something that's continuing to come. We're going to see more and more of it with NAIFA, requirements and things like that, especially when it comes to annuities. But really working with our legislators, I actually have regular meetings with our legislators since I live here in Austin, and I have a relationship with, I'd say, about 2/3 of all the legislators in Texas, because I can easily drive to the Capitol or whatever, and I talk to them about annuities. I talk to them about life insurance. I talk to them about disability. I've actually was in the middle of doing an education on finances and insurance to all the staff members of all Texas legislators, but then COVID hit, and so we had to postpone it till later this year, possibly next year. So those are a lot of different things that we can do, and we partnered with multiple different other different associations here in the state to provide that training and really helping people understand what we do, why we do it. The advantage I've had is, like I said, I've built relationships not only with my legislator, but also with legislators across the state. And that has opened doors for me, not just for my business, but for other different things. Senator Eddie Lucio out of the Rio Grande Valley, we did a town hall forum. I wish I could say it was a huge one, but we only had 2 members show up. But he came, he spoke, but that got him, opened some doors for him, and that he heard my story of some different things that I talk about. And so he now actually gets me to talk at his organization. Other legislators have asked me to talk. And so I can talk about some of the stuff that I'm doing for work, some of the other organizations I'm a part of, but also I always bring NAIFA into it and talk about exactly how NAIFA helps. And so we're able to really create block walks or other different things. And these legislators really love the fact that we're able to connect them to their end user, their constituent. And we've done multiple virtual town halls here in Texas. We've done a lot of different things. All that does is that now when there is an issue that pops up, I have Senator Lucio's cell phone. I have other different legislators' cell phones or their chief of staff cell phone that I can call and say, hey, look, we need to talk about this, so on and so forth. And those are some of the different things that really get us, farther ahead than other organizations, than other people in our industry. We have the most comprehensive lobbying opportunity here at NAIFA. But it's also propelled me to different fundraisers. Real quick, I actually do have my own 501c for abused children and domestic abuse. And if you've ever tried to raise money, it is always hard to raise money. Well, because of my relationships with NAIFA, they've heard that other story of what I'm trying to push, and they've invited me into the room. I've learned their fundraisers because of the fundraising I do for them from NAIFA. I've actually been able to meet the other fundraisers. It's actually helped us build up our nonprofit and all those other different things that really work from that. And also, I think the biggest advantage is some of the Austin area legislators that are now actually some of our congressmen and congresswomen have become clients. Because they see the education that I have. They see that I have some different things, and they've actually, some of them have wanted to become my client. Now, it probably doesn't hurt that I'm 7'2", and so I'm a little bit intimidated when I walk into their office, but they all know me. They all know when I call, they'll pick up the phone, they'll talk to me, and we'll go from there. So, I'm just going to leave it here, and I'm going to turn over to Cody here in a second, but there's power in the blue. So, the more we can do things, the better. So, Cody, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rodney. You all did great jobs with your presentations. And I'm sure, as everyone is listening has heard, there are really positive experiences to being involved in advocacy. It opens a lot of doors. There are some pretty cool long-term benefits. And I don't know if you're a political nerd like myself, but I'm sure everyone else on our panel, it's just a lot of fun to be involved with. How many people get to say that their testimony in front of a committee got a bill passed? That's something rare and just something to be proud of. And it's definitely worth saying that as young advisors, all of you are pretty uniquely positioned in the industry to help build lasting relationships with lawmakers, particularly newer, younger lawmakers who probably are coming into office, next year. You can build those relationships and they can last throughout your careers. And it's also worth saying, as if it being bolded on the slide isn't enough, that as a constituent, you are far and away more influential than any lobbyist, in DC or in your state capitals could ever be. You have your pulse on the finger of Americans, you have your pulse on the finger of your clients, you know what policies are going to be beneficial for them, and representatives really enjoy that. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide here. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about getting involved in grassroots advocacy for those of you who aren't really familiar with it. I'm sure that all the stories you've heard so far are pretty intriguing. It's just great listening to everyone with all of these experiences. It's worth pointing out ways that you can build relationships with your legislators. And the easiest way to do this is think about building a relationship with your legislator as building a relationship with a new client. It takes a lot of work up front, but there are long-term benefits as your relationship develops. Julie had mentioned some of the successes we had in the States, California being one of those examples. And all of those successes just wouldn't be possible if no one went out of their way to build those relationships before an issue came up in their legislature. Building a relationship before we need them to support an issue and getting FaceTime with your legislators is pretty straightforward. There's always some kind of in-district activity going on, before COVID times, there was always something going on that you could appear in person at. You've got your town halls, you've got campaign events. Maybe there are even some volunteer opportunities in election years. And, politicians really enjoy it when you go and volunteer for them. And, if you're an NAIFA YAT contributor, politicians love money. That's going to get you a really, really easy FaceTime with your legislator. So those are just something to be, considerate about. And of course, NAIFA puts on congressional conference pretty much every year. Last year or this year was a little bit of an exception. But it does give you an opportunity to, really interface with your elected officials on the federal level. And all of that being said, if you know someone in your legislatures, if you know a congressman, a senator, or a state representative, make sure that you let us know at the Advocacy and Action Center at NAIFA.org, it's just under the Advocacy tab. Or if you already have an established relationship with a politician who is likely to be elected on November 3rd, just go ahead and give us an email at advocacy@naifa.org. And we'll be sure to put that information in our system. It won't be easy to put it in right now because those people aren't in office yet, so it's not necessarily up, but you know, tell us now and we can make sure that we're good to go going into 2021. And that wraps up this slide. We can go to the next one. We are putting on a couple more events. October 27th at 2 p.m. for members only. We're going to be doing a pre-election webinar where we run through, our predictions for what's going to happen on November 3rd. It'll be really interesting to hear from the entire NAIFA GR team. So I hope everyone joins us then. November 11th, we'll be doing a building relationships with our new congressman webinar, and then November 19th. Hopefully by then, all the election results will be in, so we can really run through what 2021 is going to be looking like. And at this point, if there are any questions, I think we'll be fielding those. So please submit them in the chat box.
While we're waiting for some questions, do any of the panelists have questions you think people might want to hear? Rodney, I've never known you to be short of questions.
I think this question is for Julie. We're seeing a huge trend among all the different states for the best interests, for fiduciary standards, for a lot of other different things. And also, you kind of brought up the bill AB 5, I think it was, in California. Corey, I know, had a situation where he calls it the neighbor's dog bill, where it could actually affect how we paid employees and giving them family leave acts and things like that, all things that affect us as business owners. What are some of the things that we need to be aware of? Because we've talked a lot about financial issues on this call, but sometimes there's bills like the AB 5 where it's just all independents, and they're trying to actually I think do the right thing for some people, but they're missing the point in a lot of things. So what are some things we should be aware of and pay attention to in the states?
That's a really good question. And this issue can get super weedy, so I'm going to try and talk about it as high level as I can. But, a few years ago when we were unsure, where the future of the administration was going to go, in anticipation that, hey, we might have an Elizabeth Warren administration, come 2020, like nobody knew. And that initial fiduciary rule by the DOL scared a lot of people. So there was a lot of preemptive work done by the industry, which NAIFA participated in for a couple of years, working with a small working group at the NAIC, which is a group that I mentioned earlier, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and developed a set of proposed rules that we refer to as the Annuity Suitability Act. And that's a model. And once that got approved at the NAIC, NAIFA is going out and encouraging states to adopt this model. And a lot of first impressions, folks in our industry take a look at it and say, I don't really see, I'm curious why we would support this. But it's that sort, that is sort of like the groundwork we laid to say, hey, we are doing something in the space, so that if we do have a Warren administration and they do try to do a blanket fiduciary rule type of situation, we can say, no, hey, we are passing this in the states. We are doing something, we are being proactive. So I just wanted to let you know that that sort of strategy is being laid at the national level. But, with AB 5 in California, the independent contractors bill, you're right, it affects the way you work. And, unfortunately, a lot of lawmakers try to make these blanket rules, because really who were they trying to target? They were trying to target like Uber drivers and that gig economy, but we can get sucked into that. So we just always have to be vigilant and stay alert and make sure that we're not swept into it, even if it's like unknowing by the lawmakers' part. If they don't realize what an impact it's going to have on us, we're going to get stuck. So that's why it's so important to stay vigilant.
Our biggest win here in Minnesota, I didn't even talk about, but financially would have put a lot of business owners to let go of their employees and make them all 1099. We had a family medical leave bill that was proposed. Luckily, we have divided government here in Minnesota. If we didn't, it would have been approved. And the wording in the language didn't even specify, like, you literally could have had your neighbor's dog die, you not feel good enough to go to work and be out on family medical leave. The wording on it was horrible, but it was still proposed and it passed out of the House. It did not pass the Senate, luckily, but it easily would have had it where we would have had to provide family medical leave for if your neighbor's sick or your neighbor's dog's sick. I mean, it was crazy, the wording in this language. And we have to be forever vigilant in making sure we're educating the right people, but also making sure we're supporting both sides of the aisle in the process, because it's not all Democrats, it's not all Republicans, and we all come together to try and form government, and we got to make sure we're representing both sides, or eventually maybe three sides of the aisle. So.
Awesome. Well, it looks like you guys are not big on questions today, which is great. So we're just going to wrap this up. I never introduced myself. I'm Maggie Vinay, I'm the grassroots director. So I just want to say thank you to our NAIFA volunteers, Rodney, Corey, and Brent, who were here answering some questions and talking about their grassroots experience today. And we hope that we'll see you all on some of our other election related webinars in the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much for joining and have a great afternoon.